What would you do if your body betrayed you? If every step you took became heavier? If every word you tried to say slipped away before reaching your lips? If every ordinary movement slowly turned into an impossible task? Most of us would crumble under the weight of that kind of suffering. Most of us would shrink our lives, fall into despair, and surrender to fate. But there was one man who refused to surrender. He refused to let his body dictate the limits of his existence. Instead, he reached beyond the stars, unlocking secrets of black holes, time, and the very origin of the universe. That man was Stephen Hawking, and his story is one of the most astonishing tales of resilience, genius, and courage that the world has ever known. Stephen William Hawking was born on January 8, 1942, in Oxford, England. The world he entered was a dangerous one. The Second World War was raging across Europe, and Britain lived under the constant shadow of bombings and destruction. Yet on the day of his birth, there was something symbolic in the air. He was born exactly 300 years after the death of Galileo Galilei, one of the most revolutionary scientists in history. It was as if history itself had marked Stephen for greatness, drawing a cosmic line between Galileo's telescope and the universe Stephen would later seek to understand. His parents, Frank and Isabel, were not rich, but they were rich in ideas. Frank was a medical researcher, and Isabel had once studied philosophy, politics, and economics at Oxford, something quite rare for women at the time. Their home was not glamorous. In fact, it was described by many as cluttered, full of books, stacked on shelves, books piled on the floor, books spilling over every table. Dinnertime conversations were often intellectual debates about science, politics, and the world, while the children quietly absorbed the rhythm of curiosity. Stephen was the eldest of 4 children, and though he would later be celebrated as a genius, his early school years gave little indication of what was to come. His teachers described him as average, sometimes even lazy. He did not always excel at memorization or routine lessons. Yet those who knew him noticed something else. He had a love for building, for constructing, for figuring out how things worked beneath the surface. He tinkered with model trains, created complex contraptions with gears and wires, and spent hours taking things apart just to put them back together again. The seeds of a scientific mind were already sprouting, though they were hidden beneath the casual exterior of a boy who seemed to be in no rush. In 1959, at the age of 17, Stephen won a scholarship to Oxford University to study physics. Entering Oxford was intimidating for him at first. He was younger than most of his peers, shy, and felt out of place. But soon his humor, wit, and brilliance began to shine. He was not the kind of student who buried himself in endless hours of study. Instead, he relied on his sharp mind to grasp concepts quickly, often doing only the minimum work necessary while still excelling. His professors noticed that he could absorb complex ideas almost instantly, and his classmates often turned to him when they struggled to understand. Oxford was also where Stephen's personality blossomed. He joined the rowing club, not as a rower, but as a coxswain, the person who steers the boat and commands the rowers. His small frame and sharp voice made him ideal for the role, and his mischievous sense of humor made him popular. He loved adventure, enjoyed parties, and often found himself at the center of pranks. Life at Oxford was filled with laughter and energy, but beneath the surface, something was beginning to change. During his final year at Oxford, Stephen began to notice small but troubling signs. He would trip while walking. His speech sometimes slurred. His movements were clumsier than before. At first, he ignored these symptoms. He was young, active, and had no reason to think something serious was happening. But over time, the difficulties grew harder to dismiss. After graduating with honors, he went on to Cambridge University to pursue graduate studies in cosmology, the study of the universe itself. But even as he entered this new stage of life, the strange symptoms continued. It was at Cambridge that Stephen's world would be shaken forever. After a series of tests, doctors delivered a devastating diagnosis. He had amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, or ALS. It was a rare and incurable disease that attacks the motor neurons, the cells that control movement. The doctors told him bluntly that he had only 2 or 3 years to live. He was just 21 years old. Imagine that for a moment. You are barely into adulthood, your whole life ahead of you, your ambitions just beginning to take shape. Then you are told that your future has been cut short. that in just a few years your body will fail completely and you will die. For many people, such news would destroy all hope. For a while, it nearly destroyed Stevens too. He sank into depression, withdrew from others, and questioned the point of continuing. But something changed. Around this time, he met Jane Wilde, a fellow student who would later become his first wife. Their connection, her belief in him, and her unwavering support gave him a reason to keep fighting. Love, hope, and a sense of purpose began to replace despair. Stephen realized that although his body might betray him, his mind was still free. He decided that if he could not live a long life, he would live a meaningful one. He would dedicate himself to unraveling the mysteries of the universe. This decision became the turning point of his life. From this moment, Stephen Hawking was not simply a man fighting a disease. He was a man racing against time, determined to make his mark before his body could stop him. And here lies one of the strongest hooks of his story. While the average person might give up when faced with mortality, Stephen accelerated. He pushed harder, thought deeper, and worked more passionately than ever. His life became a battle against the clock, a race not to survive but to discover. And in that race, he began to change the world. He focused his research on cosmology, seeking to answer questions as old as humanity itself. How did the universe begin? How does it work? Will it one day come to an end? He was drawn to black holes, those mysterious cosmic objects so dense that not even light can escape them. At the time, black holes were poorly understood, more speculation than science. But Stephen saw them as the perfect laboratory for testing the laws of physics. His most groundbreaking contribution was his theory that black holes are not entirely black. He argued that black holes emit tiny amounts of thermal radiation, a phenomenon now known as Hawking radiation. This discovery was revolutionary because it combined two previously conflicting pillars of physics: quantum mechanics, which governs the very small, and general relativity, which governs the very large. In one stroke, Stephen Hawking had brought science closer to a unified theory of everything. As his reputation grew, so did his disease. He lost the ability to walk, to write, and eventually even to speak. Yet he never stopped working. Technology came to his aid, providing him with a speech-generating device that allowed him to communicate by moving a single cheek muscle. Through this computerized voice, Stephen continued to lecture, to write, and to inspire. His book, A Brief History of Time, published in 1988, was a sensation. Written in language accessible to ordinary people, it attempted to explain the universe in simple terms. Few expected such a book to succeed, but it became a global bestseller, selling millions of copies and staying on bestseller lists for years. Readers across the world, many of whom had never read a science book before, found themselves captivated by Stephen's explanations of time, space, and the cosmos. But Stephen was more than a scientist. He was a symbol of resilience. He was a man who, confined to a wheelchair and robbed of his voice, continued to live more fully than most people ever do. He traveled the world, gave lectures, raised a family, and became an icon of hope. His sense of humor never faded either. He often joked about his condition, about the robotic sound of his computer-generated voice, and even about the universe itself. He once quipped that life would be tragic if it weren't funny. Even Hollywood and popular culture embraced him. He appeared on shows like Star Trek, The Next Generation, and The Simpsons, always poking fun at himself. His presence reminded people that science was not only profound, but also human, relatable, and sometimes even funny. By the time of his death in 2018, Stephen Hawking had lived more than 50 years beyond his diagnosis, far exceeding every expectation. He had changed the way we think about black holes, time, and the universe, and he had inspired millions with his courage. His life proved that even when trapped in a failing body, the mind can be limitless. And here is another hook, right in the middle of his story. Stephen Hawking's greatest discovery was not about black holes, not about the universe, not even about time. His greatest discovery was about the human spirit. He showed that the limits of the body do not define the limits of the soul, and that no matter how small or fragile life seems, we always have the power to reach for something greater. As Stephen's scientific career began to soar, so too did his personal challenges. By the late 1960s and early 1970s, his disease had progressed significantly. Walking without support was no longer possible, and he relied more and more on a wheelchair. Tasks most people take for granted, tying shoelaces, holding a pen, lifting a fork, were becoming impossible. Yet somehow, Stephen's determination only grew stronger. It was as though the weaker his body became, the sharper and more unstoppable his mind grew. At Cambridge, Stephen quickly established himself as a rising star. His peers and professors marveled at his ability to think abstractly, to envision cosmic processes that no one else dared to imagine. He wasn't merely solving problems, he was reframing them entirely. One of his earliest breakthroughs came when he worked on the nature of singularities, those infinitely dense points where the laws of physics break down, such as at the center of a black hole. Along with the mathematician Roger Penrose, Stephen demonstrated that singularities are not just theoretical curiosities, but an inevitable feature of Einstein's general relativity. This work suggested that the universe itself began from a singularity, the Big Bang. This was a monumental moment. For centuries, people had debated whether the universe had a beginning or whether it had always existed. Hawking and Penrose showed, mathematically, that the Big Bang was not just an idea. It was the logical conclusion of the laws of physics. In doing so, Stephen reshaped cosmology forever. But while he was making scientific history, his personal life was equally eventful. He married Jane Wilde in 1965, a fellow student he had met shortly after his diagnosis. Jane was determined to stand by him, and their marriage was built on both love and resilience. Together, they would raise 3 children: Robert, Lucy, and Timothy. Jane became not only his partner, but also his caregiver, supporting him through the darkest times when his illness threatened to overwhelm him. Their home was filled with both struggle and joy, a place where the realities of disability collided with the warmth of family life. Imagine this: a man who could not even dress himself was writing papers that challenged the foundations of physics. A man who could not feed himself was building theories that would feed the curiosity of generations to come. This contrast between fragility and brilliance became the essence of Stephen's story. It was a living reminder that strength does not always come from the body, it often comes from the mind and spirit. By the late 1970s, Stephen's illness had advanced to the point where speaking became difficult. His voice grew slurred, and many struggled to understand him. But even this did not stop him. When he finally lost his natural voice completely after a tracheotomy in 1985, he gained a computerized voice synthesizer that became one of the most recognizable voices in the world. That robotic tone, artificial yet strangely expressive, became his trademark. Through it, he delivered lectures, cracked jokes, and continued to write. And here's another powerful hook in his journey. Stephen Hawking lost his physical voice, but in doing so, he found a voice that could reach millions more. His mechanical speech carried farther than ordinary words ever could, transcending disability to become a symbol of persistence and possibility. In 1988, Stephen published A Brief History of Time. No one could have predicted what would happen next. The book was not written for scientists but for ordinary readers, attempting to explain the origins of the universe, the nature of time, and the mysteries of black holes in language anyone could understand. Publishers expected it to sell modestly, at best. Instead, it became a phenomenon. It sold over 25 million copies worldwide, was translated into dozens of languages, and remained on bestseller lists for years. People who had never opened a science book before were suddenly captivated by the cosmos, all thanks to Stephen Hawking's ability to make the infinite seem within reach. The success of the book transformed Stephen into a global celebrity. He became more than a scientist. He became a cultural icon. His wheelchair, his computer voice, his mischievous sense of humor, and above all his genius made him instantly recognizable. He traveled the world giving lectures, met heads of state, dined with royalty, and appeared on television shows. Yet through it all, he remained grounded. Fame did not distract him from his work, nor did it change the fact that each day was a physical struggle. His fame also brought new challenges. As his health worsened, caring for him became increasingly difficult. Jane, who had stood by him for decades, was stretched thin, raising their children while also managing his care. The strain took its toll, and eventually, their marriage broke down. Though painful, Stephen's personal struggles humanized him further in the eyes of the world. He was not just a genius in a wheelchair, he was a man navigating love, family, and heartbreak just like anyone else. Through the 1990s and 2000s, Stephen continued to push forward with both science and public engagement. He published more books, including Black Holes and Baby Universes and the Universe in a Nutshell. These works combined complex physics with stunning illustrations, capturing the imagination of readers everywhere. He gave countless lectures, always managing to inspire wonder despite his condition. And here lies another hook in the middle of his life story. Stephen Hawking's greatest achievement was not his theories. It was his ability to make ordinary people care about the universe. He took ideas so vast, so abstract, that they could have remained locked in the ivory towers of academia, and he brought them into living rooms, classrooms, and conversations around the world. In doing so, he turned science into a story, and he made humanity itself the main character. Stephen also embraced popular culture with surprising enthusiasm. He appeared in shows like Star Trek, The Next Generation, The Simpsons, and The Big Bang Theory, often playing himself. These appearances revealed his sharp sense of humor and showed that he never took himself too seriously. He became a symbol, not only of science, but also of joy, the reminder that even in a failing body, one could still laugh, still joke, still connect with others. As the years went on, Stephen's scientific influence remained profound. He continued to wrestle with some of the deepest questions in physics, including the search for a theory of everything, a single framework that could unify all the forces of nature. Though he did not live to see such a theory completed, his work laid vital foundations that future scientists continue to build upon. Meanwhile, his personal philosophy grew more public. Stephen became outspoken about the need for humanity to look to the stars, to seek new homes beyond Earth, to ensure the survival of our species. He warned of threats ranging from climate change to artificial intelligence to nuclear war, urging us not to take our fragile planet for granted. His words carried weight, not just because of his fame, but because of the life he embodied, proof that even the most impossible obstacles can be overcome. By the time of his passing in March 2018, Stephen Hawking had lived more than 5 decades, beyond the 2 years doctors had given him. He left behind not only scientific discoveries, but also a legacy of hope and inspiration. His ashes were interred at Westminster Abbey, near the graves of Isaac Newton and Charles Darwin, 2 of the greatest scientists in history. It was a fitting final resting place for a man who had joined their ranks as one of the greatest minds of all time. And so, Stephen Hawking's story becomes not just the story of a man, but the story of possibility itself. His life asks us a question: what would you do if time itself were running out? Would you surrender, or would you rise, as he did, to meet the universe with courage, curiosity, and wonder? Stephen's rise in the scientific world was not just the result of his brilliance, but also his persistence in the face of limitations that would have silenced almost anyone else. His early papers on singularities caught the attention of the academic community, and soon he was regarded as one of the most promising minds of his generation. At Cambridge, he became known for his daring ideas and his ability to challenge even the most established scientists. What made him extraordinary was not only the depth of his understanding, but the way he could simplify complex concepts to their essence. While others drowned in equations, Stephen sought the story behind the math. He wanted to know what the numbers actually meant about reality itself. Even as his health declined, his scientific career advanced at breathtaking speed. By the early 1970s, he was working on what would become his most famous idea: the nature of black holes. These mysterious cosmic entities were thought to swallow everything: matter, light, and even information, never to release them again. But Stephen suspected otherwise. Using the tools of quantum mechanics, he discovered that black holes were not entirely black. They emitted faint radiation, energy slowly escaping their gravitational grip. This was shocking. If black holes could leak radiation, then eventually they could evaporate completely. This discovery, later named Hawking radiation, was a turning point. It challenged the very idea of permanence in the universe. Even the darkest, most powerful objects were not eternal. They had lifespans. They had endings. And that meant the universe itself might be stranger, more dynamic, and more fragile than anyone had realized. News of this idea spread quickly through the scientific community. Some dismissed it, others resisted it, but many recognized its brilliance. Stephen Hawking had not only altered our understanding of black holes, he had also built a bridge between the two great but conflicting theories of physics: quantum mechanics, which explains the very small, and general relativity, which explains the very large. For decades, scientists had tried to unite these two pillars, and here was a man in a wheelchair, his speech slurred and his body failing, bringing them closer together. But while Stephen's scientific star was rising, his private life was becoming increasingly complex. His marriage to Jane had begun with love and devotion, but the weight of his illness and the demands of his care grew heavier with each passing year. Jane, who had once believed in his future when no one else did, now found herself juggling the roles of wife, mother, and caregiver. Their home was often filled with medical equipment, assistance, and the constant rhythm of illness. Yet amidst the struggle, there was also joy. The laughter of their children filled the rooms, and Stephen's wit continued to lighten even the heaviest moments. He would make jokes about his condition, about the universe, about the absurdity of life itself. Humor was his shield, his weapon, and his gift to those around him. As his disease progressed, he became more dependent on others for even the smallest tasks. Yet paradoxically, his independence as a thinker only grew. He became a professor, guiding students and shaping new generations of scientists. He traveled to conferences, gave lectures, and debated with colleagues across the world. Audiences were captivated not only by his ideas, but by his sheer presence. Here was a man whose body was almost completely paralyzed, yet whose mind roamed freely across the cosmos. The publication of A Brief History of Time in 1988 transformed him from a scientist into a global icon. Few expected the book to succeed. After all, it was about physics, time, and the origin of the universe, subjects most people considered too difficult or too abstract. But Stephen's ability to explain the vast in simple terms caught the imagination of millions. People who had never cared about science before now found themselves thinking about black holes, the Big Bang, and the flow of time. The book spent over 200 weeks on the bestseller list and sold millions of copies worldwide. Overnight, Stephen Hawking became a household name. With fame came new opportunities. He met world leaders, dined with celebrities, and became a figure of inspiration far beyond the walls of academia. His robotic voice, produced by a speech synthesizer, became instantly recognizable. It was not just a tool for communication, it became his identity. That voice, mechanical yet commanding, carried wisdom, wit, and wonder. When people heard it, they listened, not because it was artificial, but because it was authentic. And here we find one of the great hooks in the middle of his journey. Stephen Hawking did not simply speak through a machine. He spoke through the silence of his condition, turning what should have been a limitation into a megaphone for his mind. In losing his natural voice, he found a universal one. But life was not all triumph. The strain of fame, illness, and family. Life eventually led to the end of his marriage with Jane. It was a painful chapter, yet it also revealed his humanity. For all his genius, Stephen was still a man, capable of love, of heartbreak, of mistakes. His second marriage, to one of his caregivers, brought new controversies and challenges, and once again, the media spotlight intensified. Through it all, Stephen remained focused on his work, refusing to let personal turmoil overshadow his mission to understand the universe. During these years, he also began to speak more openly about humanity's future. He warned of the dangers of climate change, nuclear weapons, and artificial intelligence. He urged humanity to look to the stars, to seek new homes beyond Earth, to become a multiplanetary species. In his view, survival depended not just on technology, but on imagination, the willingness to dream bigger than our current world allowed. Even as his health declined, he continued to inspire. He lectured across the world, collaborated with scientists, and published new works. His book, The Universe in a Nutshell, continued the journey of explaining complex physics with clarity and wonder. He spoke about time travel, about the possibility of other universes, about whether God was necessary to explain creation. Each time he spoke, people listened, not only because of what he said, but because of who he was, a man who had defied every limit and every expectation. By the 2000s, Stephen had become a true cultural icon. He appeared in television shows, cartoons, and documentaries. He laughed at himself, embraced parody, and turned his robotic voice into a symbol of hope. He showed that science was not just serious. It could also be joyful, funny, and deeply human. Children admired him, students were inspired by him, and even those who did not understand physics were touched by his courage. When he finally passed away in March 2018, the world mourned deeply. Yet his death also became a celebration of his life. He had lived more than 5 decades beyond the 2 years doctors had given him. He had transformed our understanding of the cosmos. He had raised a family, inspired millions, and become a beacon of what it means to overcome. His ashes were buried in Westminster Abbey, between Isaac Newton and Charles Darwin, as if history itself had carved out a space for him among the giants of science. And perhaps the greatest hook of all is this: Stephen Hawking's legacy is not only in his equations, his theories, or his books. It is in the lesson his life teaches us. That even when time is short, when the body fails, when the odds are impossible, there is still room for greatness. That the true measure of a life is not its length, but its depth. In the final years of his life, Stephen Hawking continued to surprise the world. His body may have been frail, but his spirit remained unbroken. He spoke about the need for curiosity, about the importance of laughter, about living fully even, when life seemed impossibly difficult. When asked how he managed to remain optimistic despite his condition, he answered simply, "Where there's life, there's hope." Those words carried the weight of a lifetime spent defying the odds. Stephen had once been told he would not live past the age of 25. Instead, he lived to 76. More than 50 years of extra time. Time he used to change the world. Time he used to show humanity the beauty of the universe. Time he used to remind us that limitations are never the end of the story. His life was proof that while time may be relentless, what we choose to do with our time is what defines us. When he passed away on March 14, 2018, the very same day that Albert Einstein was born, the world paused to reflect. People in every corner of the globe remembered the man in the wheelchair with the computer voice. The man who explained black holes to millions. The man who taught us to look up at the stars and not down at our feet. His ashes were laid to rest in Westminster Abbey, beside Isaac Newton and Charles Darwin, the giants whose shoulders he had stood upon and whom he now joined in history. But Stephen Hawking's true resting place is not in stone or earth. It is in the minds he awakened, the students he taught, the children he inspired, the millions who picked up his books and for the first time looked at the night sky with a sense of wonder. His legacy is written not only in equations but in hearts. And so we are left with a question, one that Stephen himself often asked in different ways throughout his life. What will we do with our time? Time is brief, fragile, and fleeting, and yet it is enough to change everything. Stephen's story reminds us that no obstacle is final, no diagnosis is the end, no limitation can silence the human spirit. So the next time you face a challenge that seems impossible, remember Stephen Hawking. Remember that even when the body fails, the mind can travel the universe. Remember that even when the world says you cannot, you still can. And most of all, remember to look up, to the stars, to the possibilities, to the infinite horizons of what life can be. Because the story of Stephen Hawking is not just his story, it is a reminder of what all of us can be, if we dare to dream, if we dare to persist, if we dare to believe that the impossible is never truly impossible.